The dollar bill trembled in Maggie Thompson's hands as she stood in Mr. Garrison's mahogany-paneled office, the crisp edges cutting into her palm like tiny paper knives. Across from her, Patricia sat in her designer suit, her lips curved into that familiar smirk that had haunted Maggie since childhood. The morning light, streaming through the tall windows, caught Patricia's diamond earrings, making them sparkle like tears Maggie refused to shed. $1, Maggie whispered, staring at George Washington's face on the bill. He left me $1. Patricia's laughter filled the room, sharp and cruel. Oh, Maggie, this is just perfect. Daddy always did have a sense of humor. Millions for me, and exactly what you're worth for you, $1 single. Just 12 hours earlier, Maggie's alarm had screamed at 4 a.m. like it did every morning. The apartment was freezing. She'd kept the heat off again to save money. Her feet hit the cold floor, and she tiptoed past her children's rooms, careful not to wake them. Christopher's door was covered in college brochures he'd never afford. Ava's had drawings of fashion designs she sketched on recycled paper, and little Ben still had his handmade "Happy Birthday to Me" sign from last week. His birthday, his 8th birthday, and all Maggie could give him was a card she'd made from cutting up a cereal box and decorating it with markers she'd borrowed from the diner. 37 cents. That's what she'd had in her wallet after buying a single candy bar to split between the three of them as his cake. The morning routine was always the same. Water down the last of the milk so everyone could have some with their cereal, pack lunches with whatever she could find, usually peanut butter sandwiches, without the jelly, because jelly was a luxury they couldn't afford this week. Christopher never complained when his shoes talked back to him through the holes in the soles. Ava never mentioned that her classmates made fun of her thrift store clothes. And Ben, sweet little Ben, he'd hugged his mother that morning and said, "Mom, you're the best birthday present I could ever have." By 5:30 a.m., Maggie was at Rosie's diner, tying her apron around her waist and preparing for another day of serving coffee to people who'd leave quarters as tips, if she was lucky. Her feet already ached in her broken shoes, the ones she'd superglued together 3 times this month. 8 hours of, "What can I get you, hun?" and coming right up, with a smile that never reached her tired eyes anymore. "Maggie, you look tired, sweetheart," old Mr. Peterson had said that morning, leaving his usual 50-cent tip. Tired. She wanted to laugh. Tired was a luxury she couldn't afford either. The lunch rush was brutal, families complaining about cold fries, while her own kids were eating free lunch at school because she'd swallowed her pride and filled out the forms. A woman screamed at her because her eggs were over medium instead of over easy, threatening to get her fired. Maggie apologized, remade her order, and watched her leave no tip at all. At 3 p.m., she'd rushed home for exactly 45 minutes, enough time to check homework, give hugs, and heat up leftover pasta with butter for their dinner before heading to her second job. The cleaning company van picked her up at 4, and by 4:30 she was on her knees scrubbing office building toilets, her hands raw from bleach, her back screaming with every movement. That's when her phone had rung. Unknown number. She'd almost ignored it. Probably another debt collector, but something made her answer. "Mrs. Thompson? This is Harold Garrison from Garrison, Whitley and Associates. I'm calling about your father, Thomas Whitmore." Father. The word felt foreign in her mouth. 15 years since he'd looked her in the eye and said, "If you marry that man, you're no daughter of mine." 15 years since he'd turned his back on her in this very office building, actually, just 20 floors up from where she was now scrubbing someone's coffee stain from expensive carpet. "He passed away 3 days ago, Mrs. Thompson. The will reading is tomorrow at 9 a.m. She'd sat there on that office floor, clutching her phone, remembering the father who'd taught her to ride a bike, who'd read her bedtime stories, who'd called her his little princess before Derek came along and everything changed. The father who'd had millions but wouldn't spare a dime when Derek left her with 3 kids and disappeared with his secretary. Now, here she stood, holding her inheritance. $1. The same amount she'd had in her pocket when she'd left his house 15 years ago, pregnant and in love with the wrong man. Well, Patricia stood, smoothing her skirt. I have a yacht to buy. Try not to spend your fortune all in one place, Maggie. Mr. Garrison cleared his throat. The estate matters are now settled. You're both free to go. Maggie looked at him, this stranger who just handed her the final insult from her father, and noticed something odd. He was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read, something between pity and anticipation. But she didn't have time to wonder. She had to get back to work. After all, $1 wouldn't pay the rent that was already 2 weeks overdue. The apartment door closed behind Maggie with a soft click that echoed through the narrow hallway. She leaned against it, her purse sliding off her shoulder and hitting the floor with a thud. The dollar bill was still clutched in her right hand, now damp with sweat from holding it so tightly during the entire bus ride home. Patricia's laughter kept replaying in her mind. $1. Oh, Maggie. Even the janitor at Father's company got $5,000 in his will. But you get exactly what you deserve. The living room was quiet. Christopher sat at the kitchen table, his calculus textbook open, using the light from his phone because the overhead bulb had burned out last week. Ava was on the couch, altering one of her own shirts with a needle and thread, trying to make it look like something from the magazines she borrowed from the library. Little Ben was already asleep on the floor next to her, his head resting on a throw pillow. Mom? Christopher looked up, his eyes immediately reading her face. What happened? Did he leave anything? Maggie held up the dollar bill, trying to force a smile. He remembered me after all. Ava's needle stopped moving. Is that it? That's it, sweetheart. Maggie's voice cracked slightly. But hey, that's $1 more than we had this morning, right? Christopher slammed his textbook shut. That's not fair. Aunt Patricia posts pictures of her mansion on Facebook all the time. She has 3 cars. And Grandpa left you $1? Chris, please, not tonight. Maggie picked up Ben carefully, his small body light in her arms. Too light. Had he lost weight again? After tucking Ben into the bed he shared with Christopher, Maggie retreated to the bathroom, the only place in their tiny apartment where she could have a moment alone. She turned on the faucet to muffle the sound, and finally let the tears come. Hot, angry tears that she'd been holding back for hours. Her father had been worth $47 million, according to Patricia's gleeful texts that were now lighting up her phone. $47 million, and he'd left his own daughter $1. Not even enough to buy a cup of coffee at the places he used to frequent. She pressed a towel against her mouth to silence the sob that threatened to wake her children. They didn't need to see her like this. They needed their mother to be strong, to figure out how to make the $17 in her checking account stretch until her next paycheck in 3 days. A soft knock on the bathroom door made her jump. Mom? It was Ava. I made you some tea. With the last tea bag. I'll leave it outside the door. Even through her tears, Maggie felt a warmth spread through her chest. Her father might have thought she was worth only $1, but her children, they were her real treasure. She splashed cold water on her face and emerged to find all 3 of her kids waiting in the hallway. Ben had woken up, his hair sticking up in every direction. Group hug? He asked sleepily. And they all collapsed together on the living room floor, arms wrapped around each other. We don't need Grandpa's money, Ava whispered. We have each other. But it would have helped with the rent, Christopher muttered, ever practical. They stayed like that for a while, just holding each other, when Ben suddenly said, Mom, my teacher says that sometimes when bad things happen, good things are just around the corner, waiting to surprise us. Maggie kissed the top of his head. Your teacher sounds very wise. Later, after the kids had gone to bed, Maggie sat at the kitchen table with her calculator, doing the same depressing math she did every month. Rent was $800, already late. Electric bill was $140, final notice. Food for the week, if she stretched it, maybe $30. Her paycheck would be $420 after taxes. The second job brought in another $300. Still short? Always short. She placed the dollar bill on the table, staring at it. $1. A final insult from the man who'd once carried her on his shoulders, who'd taught her to play chess, who'd called her his brightest star. The clock on the microwave showed 11:47 p.m. She needed to sleep. Another 4 a.m. wake-up was coming fast. She stood, leaving the dollar on the table, and headed to her bedroom, a converted closet just big enough for a twin mattress on the floor. At exactly midnight, 3 loud knocks shook the apartment door. Maggie bolted upright, her heart pounding. Who would come at this hour? The landlord? But he never came this late. 3 more knocks, more insistent this time. She crept to the door and peered through the peephole. Mr. Garrison stood in the hallway, rain dripping from his coat, his face urgent and serious. Maggie's hand trembled as she unlocked the chain and opened the door. Mr. Garrison stood in the dim hallway light, his usually perfect silver hair disheveled from the rain. Water dripped from his expensive coat onto the worn carpet, and his eyes held an intensity she hadn't seen during the will reading. "Mrs. Thompson, I apologize for the late hour, but you need to come with me immediately. There's something about your inheritance you don't know." "Mr. Garrison? It's midnight. What are you talking about?" Maggie pulled her thin robe tighter around herself, glancing back toward her children's rooms. "The dollar your father left you, it wasn't what you think. Please, get dressed. We need to leave now." "I don't understand. You read the will. $1. That's what he left me." Mr. Garrison stepped closer, lowering his voice. "That was only the public reading, Mrs. Thompson. Your father's will contained a hidden clause that could only be activated after the initial reading was complete. The dollar wasn't an insult, it was a test." Maggie stared at him, wondering if exhaustion was making her hear things. "A test? What kind of test?" "The kind that determines who truly deserves an inheritance. Your sister failed the moment she laughed at your pain. But you passed simply by accepting it with dignity." The hallway seemed to spin around her. "Mr. Garrison, I don't have money for games or riddles. I have 3 kids sleeping in there, and I need to be at work in 4 hours. You won't need that job anymore." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope. "These are the real documents. The ones your father sealed 20 years ago, with specific instructions." Maggie's legs felt weak. She leaned against the doorframe. 20 years ago? But that was before Derek, before the kids, before your father made the biggest mistake of his life by choosing pride over love. Mr. Garrison's voice softened. "He's been watching you, Mrs. Thompson. All these years, he's been watching." "Watching me? What do you mean?" "Get dressed. I'll explain everything in the car. But we need to go now. There are time constraints involved." 20 minutes later, Maggie sat in the passenger seat of Mr. Garrison's luxury sedan, still feeling like she was trapped in some strange dream. The rain pounded against the windshield as they drove through empty streets, heading away from the city. "Your father hired a private investigator 15 years ago," Mr. Garrison began, his eyes focused on the dark road ahead. "Not to spy on you, but to document your life. He wanted to know what kind of person you'd become without his money." Maggie's stomach churned. "He had someone following me?" "Following is too strong a word. Observing, perhaps. Do you remember the homeless man you gave your lunch to last Christmas? The one outside the diner? Old Pete? Of course. He was hungry, and I had an extra sandwich. That sandwich cost you your own lunch that day. The investigator noted that you went without food so someone else could eat." "Mr. Garrison reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph. This was taken that day. In the dim light from the dashboard, Maggie could see herself handing a wrapped sandwich to a man in tattered clothes. She remembered that day. Her stomach had growled all afternoon, but Pete's grateful smile had been worth it. "There are hundreds of photos like this," Mr. Garrison continued. "You working double shifts to buy Ava's prom dress. You giving your last $5 to help Christopher's friend whose family couldn't afford school supplies. You volunteering at the food bank on your only day off. Those were just normal things. Anyone would have done the same. No, Mrs. Thompson, they wouldn't have. Your sister certainly didn't. The investigator documented her activities too. While you were sacrificing for others, she was stealing from charity funds at her country club. While you were working 2 jobs to support your children, she was lying to your father about helping you financially. The car turned onto a winding country road Maggie had never seen before. Tall trees lined both sides, their branches creating a tunnel in the headlights. Where are we going? To see what your father really left you. The dollar was just the key that unlocked everything else. They drove in silence for another hour, the city lights fading behind them. Maggie's mind raced with questions, but exhaustion was starting to take over. She dozed fitfully, waking when the car slowed. Through the rain-streaked window, she saw massive iron gates appearing in the headlights. Mr. Garrison pressed a button on a remote, and the gates swung open silently. "Welcome," he said quietly, "to your real inheritance." The car crunched over a gravel driveway that seemed to stretch forever through perfectly manicured gardens. Even in the darkness and rain, Maggie could see the outline of towering oak trees and carefully trimmed hedges. Her breath fogged the window as she pressed her face against the glass, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Then the mansion came into view. It rose from the landscape like something from a fairy tale, with tall windows glowing warmly in the night and ivy climbing up stone walls. The building was enormous, bigger than the entire apartment complex where Maggie lived. Columns supported a grand entrance, and wide steps led up to massive wooden doors. "This can't be real," Maggie whispered. Mr. Garrison parked near the entrance, where a woman stood waiting under a large umbrella. She was elderly, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. Despite the late hour, she was fully dressed in a simple but elegant blue dress. "That's Mrs. Blackwood," Mr. Garrison explained. "She's been the caretaker here for 30 years. She's been waiting for this night almost as long as I have." As they approached the entrance, Mrs. Blackwood stepped forward with tears streaming down her cheeks. "Oh, my dear child," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You look just like your mother did at your age. I've waited so long for this moment." "I don't understand any of this," Maggie said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "Come inside, dear. Everything will make sense soon." Mrs. Blackwood took Maggie's arm gently and led her up the steps. The front doors opened to reveal a grand foyer with marble floors and a crystal chandelier that cast rainbow patterns on the walls. A sweeping staircase curved up to the second floor, and oil paintings in golden frames lined the walls. But what caught Maggie's attention were the photographs. Dozens of them, all in silver frames, covering a long table near the entrance. As she moved closer, her heart nearly stopped. They were pictures of her and her children. Recent pictures. There was Christopher at his high school graduation last year, his proud smile beaming despite his second-hand suit. Ava at the school art fair, standing next to her winning painting. Little Ben on his first day of second grade, his backpack almost bigger than he was. And there were pictures of Maggie too, serving coffee at the diner, walking home from work, reading bedtime stories to her children. "How did he get these?" Maggie's voice was barely a whisper. Mrs. Blackwood dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "Your father never stopped loving you, dear. He was just too proud and stubborn to admit his mistake. But he watched you raise those beautiful children. Watched you work so hard to give them everything you could." Mr. Garrison led them deeper into the house, through rooms filled with antique furniture and more photographs. In the library, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves surrounded a massive oak desk. On the desk sat a letter with Maggie's name written in her father's familiar handwriting. "He wrote this 5 years ago," Mr. Garrison said, "but left instructions that you could only read it after the public will reading." With shaking hands, Maggie picked up the envelope and carefully opened it. The letter was written on thick, cream-colored paper in her father's careful script. "My dearest Margaret, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have received your inheritance of $1. I imagine you are confused and hurt, perhaps even angry. You have every right to be. 15 years ago, I made the worst mistake of my life. I chose my pride over my daughter's happiness. I was so angry that you wouldn't listen to my warnings about Derek that I forgot the most important thing. You were my little girl, and you needed your father's support, not his judgment. I watched from afar as Derek left you with 3 children and no money. I saw you work 2 jobs, sacrifice everything for those beautiful kids, and never once ask me for help. Your pride matched my own, and I was both heartbroken and proud. You chose love over money 15 years ago, and I was too foolish to see that you had chosen correctly. Derek may have broken your heart, but you never let it break your spirit. You became something I never was, truly wealthy in the things that matter. Your sister inherited my money because money is all she ever understood. But you, my darling daughter, you have inherited my heart and my true treasure. This house, these grounds, everything you see, it has always been meant for you. But more than that, you have shown me what real wealth looks like. It's in the way Christopher protects his younger siblings. It's in Ava's kindness to everyone she meets. It's in Ben's joy despite having so little. You raise them with love instead of money, and they are richer than Patricia will ever be. I hope someday you can forgive a foolish old man who learned too late that love is the only inheritance that truly matters. Your father, Thomas. Maggie sank into the leather chair behind the desk, the letter trembling in her hands as tears blurred her vision. Maggie wiped her tears with the back of her hand and looked up at Mrs. Blackwood, who was watching her with gentle understanding. I don't understand. If he wrote this 15 years ago, why didn't he ever contact me? Why did he let me struggle all these years? Mrs. Blackwood sat down in the chair across from the desk. Oh, my dear, he tried so many times. He would pick up the phone and dial your number, then hang up before it rang. He drove past your apartment building dozens of times, but never got out of the car. His pride was like a wall he couldn't climb over. Mr. Garrison opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. But he never stopped taking care of you, even if you didn't know it. Mrs. Thompson, do you remember when your landlord suddenly decided not to raise your rent 3 years ago? Maggie nodded slowly. He said the building owner had a change of heart. Your father bought the building. He's been your landlord for 3 years, making sure you had a safe place to live. Mr. Garrison opened the folder and spread papers across the desk. And when Christopher needed surgery for his broken arm 2 years ago, do you remember how the hospital suddenly found a charity fund to cover the costs? The nurse said it was a miracle, Maggie whispered. Your father created that fund. He's been watching over you and your children in every way he could without revealing himself. Mrs. Blackwood stood and walked to a cabinet in the corner of the library. She opened it to reveal shelves lined with journals, all bound in dark leather. He kept detailed records of everything. Every act of kindness you showed to others, every sacrifice you made for your children, every time you chose to help someone else, even when you had nothing to give. She pulled out one of the journals and opened it to a random page. Listen to this entry from last Christmas. Margaret gave her last $20 to the family next door so they could buy their daughter a birthday present. She told Christopher they would have to wait until her next paycheck to buy groceries, but she smiled when she said it. She has learned something I never did, that giving makes you richer, not poorer. Maggie's hands shook as she reached for the journal. Page after page was filled with her father's careful handwriting, documenting moments she had forgotten. The time she stayed late to help train a new waitress at the diner, even though it meant missing Ben's school play. The day she gave her winter coat to a homeless woman and walked home in the cold. The countless times she had chosen kindness over comfort. But there's more, Mr. Garrison said, pulling out another set of documents. This estate includes 200 acres of farmland that generates income from crop leases. There are also 12 rental properties in the city that provide monthly income. And then there's the foundation. Foundation? The Whitmore Foundation for Single Mothers. Your father established it 5 years ago with $50 million. It provides housing assistance, job training, and educational scholarships for women in situations like yours. He wanted you to run it, but only if you proved worthy of the responsibility. Mrs. Blackwood returned to her chair, her eyes twinkling. The monthly income from all the properties and investments is approximately $40,000. You'll never have to work 2 jobs again, dear. You'll never have to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. Maggie felt dizzy. $40,000? Every month? Every month, Mr. Garrison confirmed. But there's a condition. Patricia can contest the will if she discovers the truth within 30 days of the public reading. Your father wanted to make sure she revealed her true character first. What do you mean? Mrs. Blackwood leaned forward. Your father left specific instructions. Patricia inherited his liquid assets, the money in his bank accounts, and investment portfolios. But she doesn't know about this estate, the foundation, or the rental properties. If she can go 30 days without trying to help you or your children, then everything becomes yours permanently. And if she does try to help, then she gets half of everything, Mr. Garrison said. Your father believed in redemption, even for Patricia, but he also knew her heart. He was betting that her greed would prevent her from sharing even a small portion of her inheritance with you. Maggie stood and walked to the tall windows that looked out over the estate grounds. Even in the darkness, she could see the outline of gardens, a small lake, and what looked like a barn in the distance. This is really mine? It's really yours, Mrs. Blackwood said softly. Your father spent the last 15 years of his life making sure of it. He had the best lawyers, the most detailed contracts, everything designed to protect you and your children. Mr. Garrison gathered the papers back into his briefcase. There's one more thing. Your father's personal study is upstairs, exactly as he left it. He wanted you to see it, to understand the man he became after you left. As they climbed the grand staircase, Maggie's mind raced with possibilities. Christopher could go to any college he wanted. Ava could pursue her dreams of fashion design. Ben could have everything he needed and more. But more than that, she could help other mothers who were struggling the way she had struggled. At the top of the stairs, Mrs. Blackwood opened a door to reveal a room that took Maggie's breath away. The walls were covered with more photographs of her and her children, but also with newspaper clippings about her volunteer work, copies of her children's report cards, and even drawings that Ben had made in school. On the desk sat a small framed photo of Maggie as a little girl, sitting on her father's shoulders, both of them laughing at something outside the camera's view. He never stopped being your father, Mrs. Blackwood whispered. He just forgot how to show it. 3 weeks passed, like a dream that Maggie kept expecting to wake up from. She had moved her children into the mansion, watching their faces light up as they explored room after room. Christopher had claimed the library as his study space, surrounded by more books than he'd ever seen. Ava had turned one of the spare bedrooms into an art studio, her sketches and fabric samples spread across tables that had once held priceless antiques. Ben had discovered the gardens and spent his days chasing butterflies and building forts under the old oak trees. Maggie had quit both her jobs, though she'd given Rosie's Diner 2 weeks' notice and helped train her replacement. The other waitresses had stared in disbelief when she'd explained about her inheritance, and more than one had muttered about lucky breaks and some people having all the luck. But Patricia had been silent. No phone calls, no visits, no attempts to contact Maggie at all. According to Mr. Garrison, she had been busy spending her inheritance on a new yacht, a vacation home in the Hamptons, and a collection of expensive jewelry that she flaunted on social media. On the 21st day, Maggie was in the kitchen making lunch for her children when she heard a car door slam in the driveway. Through the window, she saw Patricia climbing out of a bright red sports car, her face twisted with fury. "Kids, go upstairs," Maggie said quietly. Christopher immediately understood the tone and herded his younger siblings toward the back staircase. Patricia didn't bother knocking. She burst through the front door like a hurricane, her designer heels clicking angrily on the marble floor. "Where is it, Maggie? Where's the real will?" Hello, Patricia. It's nice to see you too. Don't play games with me. Patricia's voice echoed through the foyer. I know there's more. I hired my own investigator, and he found records of property transfers, foundation documents, all kinds of things that weren't mentioned in the will reading. Maggie remained calm, though her heart was pounding. I don't know what you're talking about. This house, for starters. Patricia gestured wildly at the chandelier, the paintings, the obvious wealth surrounding them. You're living in a mansion, Maggie. You can't afford this place on a waitress salary, even if you worked 100 jobs. Mrs. Blackwood appeared from the kitchen, carrying a tea tray. Good afternoon, Miss Patricia. Would you care for some refreshments? I remember you, Patricia snapped. You worked for my father. Tell me what's going on here. I work for Miss Margaret now, Mrs. Blackwood replied calmly, setting the tray on a side table. Patricia whirled back to face Maggie. I know what happened. Daddy left you more than $1, didn't he? He left you all of this, and somehow you managed to hide it from the will reading. Why would that matter to you? Maggie asked. You inherited $47 million. Isn't that enough? It's not about the money. Patricia's face was red with anger. It's about fairness. I was the good daughter. I stayed close to him, I visited him, I never ran off with some loser and embarrassed the family name. You visited him twice a year, and only when you needed money. That's not true. Mrs. Blackwood cleared her throat softly. Actually, Miss Patricia, I kept records of all visitors to your father's home. In the last 5 years of his life, you visited exactly 7 times. Each visit lasted less than an hour, and each time you left with a check. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish. That's not the point. The point is that I deserve half of whatever he left her. Half? Maggie raised an eyebrow. 3 weeks ago you were laughing at my $1 inheritance. You said I got exactly what I deserved. Things have changed. What's changed, Patricia? Have you suddenly developed sisterly love? Have you been worried about me and my children living in poverty all these years? Patricia's silence was telling. Because if you had been worried, Maggie continued, you could have helped us any time in the last 15 years. You knew where I lived. You knew I was struggling. You could have shared even a tiny portion of your wealth with your sister and her children. I didn't think. You didn't think we were worth helping. But now that you think there might be more money involved, suddenly you care about fairness. Mr. Garrison's car pulled into the driveway, and Patricia's face went pale. You called him, didn't you? You're trying to cut me out completely. Actually, Mr. Garrison said as he entered the foyer, I've been expecting this conversation. Your father predicted it would happen around this time. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope. Patricia, your father left specific instructions for this moment. He knew you would eventually discover the truth about Maggie's inheritance, and he wanted you to have one final chance. Patricia snatched the envelope and tore it open, her eyes scanning the contents rapidly. As she read, her face went from angry to shocked to devastated. No, she whispered. He can't do this to me. 6 months later, Maggie stood in what had once been the mansion's grand ballroom, now transformed into a bustling community center. The crystal chandeliers still hung from the ceiling, but below them, children played on colorful mats, while their mothers attended job training classes in the adjoining rooms. The sound of laughter and conversation filled the space that had been silent for so many years. Mom, look! Ben came running up to her, his face beaming with joy. In his hands, he held a drawing he'd made in the art therapy class that Ava now helped teach. I drew our family, and I put Grandpa in it too, even though I never met him. Maggie knelt down to examine the picture. Ben had drawn all of them standing in front of the mansion, but floating above them was a figure with a kind smile and outstretched arms. That's beautiful, sweetheart. I think Grandpa would love it. Christopher appeared from the computer lab, where he'd been helping other teenagers with their college applications. At 17, he carried himself with a confidence that came from knowing his future was secure. Mom, Mrs. Rodriguez just got accepted to nursing school. She's crying happy tears in the kitchen. That's wonderful news. Maggie felt the familiar warmth that came from seeing lives transformed. The Whitmore Foundation had already helped over 200 families, providing everything from emergency housing to educational scholarships. Ava rushed over from the sewing workshop, her hands covered in fabric dye. Mom, you need to see what Mrs. Chen made. She's designing clothes for her job interviews, and they're absolutely gorgeous. As her children scattered back to their activities, Maggie walked to the large windows that overlooked the gardens. The grounds were no longer perfectly manicured. They'd been converted into vegetable gardens, where families could grow their own food, and playgrounds where children could run freely. A knock at the front door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Blackwood appeared from the kitchen, but Maggie waved her off. I'll get it. She opened the door to find Derek standing on the steps, looking older and more worn than she remembered. His expensive suit couldn't hide the desperation in his eyes. Hello, Maggie. You look, well, Derek. What do you want? I heard about your inheritance, about all this. He gestured toward the mansion and grounds. I was thinking maybe we could talk. About us. About the kids. Maggie reached into her pocket and pulled out the same dollar bill her father had left her, now carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. She held it out to him. What's this? Your inheritance, she said calmly. The same nothing you gave us when you left. Derek's face flushed red. Come on, Maggie. I made mistakes, but I'm their father. Surely I deserve something. You deserve exactly what you gave us. Nothing. But unlike you, I'm not completely heartless. She pointed toward the community center. There's a job training program here. If you want to be part of your children's lives, you can start by learning how to be a responsible adult. Derek looked past her into the mansion, his eyes calculating. This place must be worth millions. The kids are my children too. I have rights. You signed away your rights when you abandoned them for your secretary. But if you want to try to be a father again, the door is open. Just don't expect money to be part of the equation. He stared at her for a long moment, then turned and walked back to his car without another word. As his car disappeared down the driveway, another vehicle approached. Maggie smiled as she recognized the Postal Service van. The driver, a young woman named Lisa, had been one of the Foundation's first success stories. Special delivery, Mrs. Thompson, Lisa called out cheerfully, handing Maggie an envelope. Inside was a letter written on cheap notebook paper in shaky handwriting. Dear Mrs. Thompson, my name is Patricia Whitmore Sterling. I am writing from the county jail, where I am serving time for embezzling funds from various charities. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I finally understand what Daddy was trying to teach us. You were always the better daughter, the better person. I was so blinded by greed that I couldn't see what real wealth looked like. I heard about the foundation and all the families you're helping. Daddy would be so proud of you. I don't expect you to visit me or even write back. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry for everything, for laughing at your inheritance, for all the cruel things I said over the years, for never being the sister you deserved. Maybe someday, when I get out of here, you could teach me how to be a better person. I'd like to learn how to help people instead of just taking from them. Your sister, Patricia. P.S. I kept one photo from Daddy's house, the one of us as little girls, building a fort in his study. I remember that day. We were happy then, before I let money poison my heart. Maggie folded the letter carefully and walked to her father's study, which she'd kept exactly as he'd left it. On the desk, she placed the letter next to the framed photo of herself as a child on her father's shoulders. She picked up the photo and smiled at the memory. Thank you, Daddy, she whispered, for teaching me that the best inheritance isn't money, it's the chance to make other people's lives better. Outside, she could hear her children's laughter mixing with the voices of all the families who now called this place home. The dollar bill that had once seemed like an insult had become the key to something far more valuable than money, that had unlocked a legacy of love, compassion, and hope that would continue long after she was gone. In the end, her father had been right. She was truly wealthy, not because of what she owned, but because of what she gave away.